Still got to get that camera to work. No,
That's an interesting symbol.
this one.
I wonder what that is.
There we go.
Yeah, you are on. You're on.
Yeah,
You're good in the picture.
not the best light here. Power is out at my place.
Oh, really? How are you hooked
out
up?
in the windstorm. So it's been 2 days now.
Wow.
Oh.
Are
So
you
we're-
somewhere else?
Yeah, my wife and I retreated. We have a little vacation property in the South Sound. So we retreated there. We have a friend who's coming over occasionally and turning on the gas fireplace to heat the living room so that the fish don't die.
Oh, yeah.
A tropical fish tank.
Will you?
And we always worried about the power going out here. We're in a rural county and the power is in the city.
We live in the middle of Ballard, right next to a substation, and our power went out.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, for heaven's sake.
did you hear something? We heard something actually blow up.
Not this time. In the
Darkness.
end of August, we did. They blew out some transformers along our
Ooh,
street. But
it was dramatic.
this time it was a tree across something about 7 blocks away. But Nan is not going to be here today, just to let you
Right.
know.
Saw that email from
Oh,
her.
good. Good.
Before we start, Richard, I have asked you before if you would lecture on Spinoza, and you said no because you didn't know much about him. But I'm still going to ask you because this book came out.
Uh-huh.
And I think it's maybe fascinating because Spinoza.
A little higher. Courtier and the Heretic. Oh, okay.
And because Spinoza is Dutch, of course.
Yeah.
And he's Jewish.
Yeah.
And I have 50% Jewish blood.
Heretic. Courtier and the Heretic. Okay.
I just want, if you would consider it, that's all. Of course.
Well, I think I'd have to try to read it first.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that
Yeah.
sounds interesting. Okay. That's great. Oh, actually, well, while we're talking, yeah, does anybody else have any thoughts about that?
I've always been curious about Spinoza,
Okay.
but I'm new to this group. I'm willing to go anywhere.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, what it's sort of evolved to is when I find something interesting, I offer a class on it.
Yeah.
So it's pretty freeform, and and new ideas are always a good idea. So.
And this man's note, he mentions Spinoza, Martin Hagglund. He does
yes.
mention him a few times.
Yeah,
And,
multiple times.
yeah.
I mean, anyone who's talking about the history of atheism is probably going to mention Spinoza.
Yeah.
And also, revisiting, perhaps redoing some of your classes would be okay too by me.
Okay, always.
Definitely this book, because the book is really fabulous. And I can't take in everything. I'm too old. There's only that much I can take in. But I wouldn't mind doing this again in some time.
Well, I'll get it. I'm going to take winter off. So
Yeah.
I can find something for I'll get a hold of it and read it and see what I can make of it. Yeah. Okay. I like that idea. Okay, well, let's get going. I think I want to go back to the podcast called The Dig. Let's see, 3520. Let me just see if I can bring that up.
Oh, beautiful.
Whoa. Okay, that brought up that. Maybe, yeah, that's where I saved a note about. No, that's not what we're doing here. Do this. Okay.
Of The Dig is brought to you by our listeners who support us at patreon.com. and by
There we go.
Say one thing, it's important for the sort of dialectical structure of the account that even though I give an account of why wage labor is alienating and why it has to be overcome, I also want to do justice to the very important argument in Marx that historically speaking, wage labor is also a form of progress.
Okay, let me back that up a little. I think something's off with my little time marker.
Is alienating is that like even when we are doing things that in one sense we say like this is important and meaningful itself, the very possibility of being engaged in the activity depends on a system of wealth production that is contradictory, that is actually alien, that we can't affirm the principles of, and that leads to all sorts of contradictions. And this is part of like how I'm grounding the argument for why, like, by lights of the very commitment to freedom and being able to affirm the relations and institutions on which we depend, we need to overcome capitalism.
Yeah, let's talk about that more.
Okay, that's where
there's a lot to talk about in terms of wage labor here. And I guess I'll start before we get to why wage labor is just this fundamental contradiction. Maybe we should clarify something you said in your last response in terms of alienation. And you're right, the wage labor form is alienating, and that under socialism, labor would not be alienated because we would, quote, recognize ourselves in what we do. What is it about the social form of wage labor rather than its concrete activity as just labor that is alienating under capitalism?
Yeah, again, important question. And if it's okay, I'll just back up because I also want to say one thing. It's important for the sort of dialectical structure of the account that even though I give an account of why wage labor is alienating and why it has to be overcome, I also want to do justice to the very important argument in Marx that historically speaking, wage labor is also a form of progress previous to other forms of work, because it's the first social form that in principle recognizes that everyone's time is valuable. So unlike a slave who is not recognized, his time is not recognized as any value at all, we have like a sort of formal recognition that like everyone's time is valuable and that you own your life in a specific sense with wage labor. Sustained argument that I develop has to do with how that recognition of that is the time to lead our lives, that is valuable and gives value to our lives, that recognition can't be sustained under capitalism, because what generates value and what makes us measure how much wealth we have socially is not how much time we have to pursue the activities and types of work that we take to be intrinsically valuable and meaningful, but value is generated through the time we spend on producing and consuming commodities. And that makes all questions of what is meaningful and what is valuable secondary to the question of what is profitable. And that priority of profit is a priority that we all have to sustain, regardless of what we think about it, just through our practice, because we all depend for our very survival on that there is a generation of profit in the economy.
And you write that this is a core contribution.
Yeah, okay. So I think there are actually a couple of important things going on in there. So the last bit, we're going to come back to value, but the last bit, oh nuts, maybe I've lost it. All right, well, let me go back to value.
I do like the notion.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I do. I was taken by recognize ourselves in our work. That is really, to me, powerful to be able to do that.
Yeah. Now, and right, what he's getting at is that's an ideal to move.
Right. I understand.
Yeah.
But
and so,
certainly some artists must feel that way.
I feel that.
He was using himself as an example that as a professor, he feels that way.
Yeah. Oh,
so
right.
Not everybody. I mean, there's some forms of work that do offer that. Even under capitalism. It's just there's so many other people don't have that.
Where are you, Richard?
It's a bedroom.
There's some unfinished work in the bedroom. Looks to me like, no?
Yeah, it's just still kind of rustic. All. It's you can see the lots of oak. It was a Lindell hit house that was built in the 90s. We bought
Sorry.
5 years ago. So yeah, it has a nice rustic. Anyway, okay, so okay, so the alienation point, that's very important. The value one, I don't want to let that go while I still have it in my head. It's a curious question that economists have been debating for a long time. What is it that gives something value? Where is this value? Whence comes this value? And we often enough think about that in a way that's kind of natural, in that a diamond is natural and valuable, or timber is valuable and natural. And so nature has things of value in it, and so we can get that. But what the Marxist point of view wants to notice is that all of those things actually have labor tied up in them. And so Marx was an advocate of an idea that he inherited actually from Adam Smith, and then that it was developed a little more by a guy called David Ricardo, another English economist who lived between Adam Smith and Marx, called the labor theory of value. And capitalist economists don't like this idea because it gives labor too much importance. But the idea is that all value in our economies comes ultimately from labor. So you think about the diamond or the timber, they're valuable commodities, but they can't become commodities until labor has acted upon them. You have to go find the diamond. You have to clean up the diamond. You have to cut the diamond. The trees, you have to cut the trees and, cut them into boards and all of that. So even things that might have immediate value. I discovered this interesting show there was a documentary about people who go out looking for fossils, big dinosaur fossils. And a full T-Rex skeleton can be worth $5, $6, $10 million. And it's something that's just there in the ground. Well, and if you ask the labor theory of value about that, what you discover is, okay, let's say $2 million. Now, how much labor is actually invested in that object for it to become worth $2 million? And that's the part that we just sort of we kind of gloss over by not stopping to notice it. And it's the fact that fossil hunters have to spend a lot of time looking for a place to dig. They spend a lot of time digging, and then somebody else has to spend an incredible amount of time preparing the fossils for display because they don't come out of the ground looking like that.
Another example of that is artists who, like a watercolorist, can do something in 5 minutes that she can sell for $300, and someone would say, how could you sell that for $300? It only took you 5 minutes. And the answer is no, it took me 40 years and 5 minutes.
Exactly. Yes, that's the same exact. Yes, exactly. Same idea. Yeah. Yeah. And so anyway, so labor theory of value. So that the question that Hagglund then is going to have to get into, but not going to have an answer yet for us. He's just going to point at it. Is that, well, what does it mean for a society that's not based on exploitation to have value? So how is there something does something change if the nature of the relationship to work changes? So he doesn't have an answer to that, but it's just an open question. No, it's kind of a speculative question. What would that mean? But along the way, what he wants us to notice while we're asking this question about value is his point about socially available free time. And so it's in a way, it's kind of the other side of the coin, that the monetary value comes from human labor, And the value of free time comes from the human beings using, in a sense, using their labor power, but not for productive purposes, but for something else that is just desirable, pleasurable, or whatever, hobby, whatever interest one has. So if what we might be moving towards then is if we're going to value labor centrally in the economy, which is presumably what a socialist economy would do by putting its attention on the role of labor rather than on the role of capital, then then we become aware of the fact that this socially available free time, because it's the other side of our labor. And it's if we have a system that respects labor, I think what he's getting at is that also would then respect this idea of socially available free time. And because it's labor or human time that's producing all value, the free time then has all of this value built in. Because what we're going to value is people's time rather than the product of their time. Does that make sense at all?
Do you have an example?
That's a good question. Do I have an example? I don't think I do. Not yet. Not yet. Not yet. Let me try saying it a little bit differently.
It does align with his notion of finity. I guess I didn't know how to pronounce it. The notion of finite time.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, because you only have a certain amount of time in your life. So
right. And you often hear in anecdotes or sayings that, time is more valuable than anything else, but it's more anecdotal than realized.
Right. That's what I'm trying to get at, is that we don't actually organize society around that idea. It's organized instead around the idea of exploiting that time rather than honoring that time.
Could it be too that has a different vision of faith? We have to have faith in one another rather than faith in something that is to be seen, hanging in the air somewhere. So
that's a good idea. Yeah, because I think you're right. It's implying along the way you have this shared commitment. He likes to talk about that, shared commitments to create a life together.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that definitely is presupposed in all of that you have to have that shared project.
I don't think people are capable. I just don't think people are capable of it.
Well, this is, I mean, that the idea is not that people are capable of it now, but that they're capable in the future. The capacity is there if it's developed into the future, is, I guess, maybe what is the way I would put it as a Marxist. We have that capacity. It's not actualized. So if you tried to do it right now, it wouldn't work. People wouldn't respond right. The society has to grow into it, which is what you see. Ultimately, that's what Marx called socialism. Is the thing that Hagglund's calling social democracy is what Marx called communism. And Marx's idea, his philosophy history is capitalism will collapse. Something will be rebuilt out of that he calls socialism. But the point of that socialism is actually just to move along to get towards that communism thing. And that has to be a multi-generational process.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't happen in one generation or two or three. It would take many.
So I don't know if this is what you're talking about, but teachers, like I'm a private music teacher and people pay me for my time.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not they, what they get out of it is kind of up to them. But I'm paid for my time. I'm not,
well, and your skill.
Right.
Your skill.
And I kind of proceed along with an idea that I have every confidence that this child or this adult has within them the capacity to learn music and in a way that satisfies them. And that's what I offer them and work with them. But they don't pay me for the outcome so much as my time because they have a stake in the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of what you're talking about, or not quite?
I think it's we're trying to describe ways of organizing the world that we don't really have right now. So it's kind of, so some of it is really imaginative, I think. But
Yeah.
but it strikes me the way you're describing it is that there is something about that relationship that it's existing inside all of the systems of exchange that we have with capitalism, but it is a different dynamic when you're working for yourself.
Yeah, it is.
Because the point of capitalism is to exploit labor, but the labor has to be someone else's labor, not your own. That to work out right. So, and there are people who think that the way to think about a model of an economy that going into the future that would accomplish this would be the model of worker cooperatives.
Yeah.
So in that sense, there is no capitalist because the worker cooperative, everyone owns it. And so you're in that self-employed model, even though you can take that worker cooperative and apply it in a fairly large context. I mentioned the Mondragon Corporation in Spain. The Basque region of Spain is the 7th largest corporation in Spain, and it's a collection of worker cooperatives. So there's no capitalist in the story. There's just the workers working for themselves, producing value.
What is that called?
The parent company is called Mondragon.
How you spell it?
M-O-N, Dragon. It's a region it's a mountain, there's a town too.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Okay.
In the Basque region.
Yeah.
Goes back to the late 40s, I think 49 maybe.
But Richard, in order to do that, they have to have money so that people can retire. So you have to put money aside.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Well, it's just part of the compensation everyone's getting. You've built it in ahead of time.
What do they do with that money then?
I imagine they're doing what other people do with it. They pool it and invest it. Now, if in a world that doesn't have that, I mean, Mondragon is existing in a capitalist world, so it's going to relate to that capitalist world for services and inputs and stuff like that. But if there was no, then it wouldn't be a matter of investing. It'd probably just be a matter of saving. That's it. I hadn't actually thought. I hadn't heard anyone ask that specific question. What would it look like? I mean, ideally, you would want it to be on larger and larger scales. The scale of a nation, if not bigger, because that way you're pooling lots of resources that people can draw on, and since people might have tragedies in their lives and need to draw on that system earlier than other people, it's going to be uneven. Some people will die younger, but if you pool all of it the way you put insurance, kind of naturally pools everything. You just kind of treat it on an insurance model.
And there's probably a huge safety net in that model. So the cost of housing, medicine, etc., would be a lot less.
Yeah.
I imagine.
Yeah, because you definitely, you'd want to, because the society would put controls on those things if it's going to be organized in his social democratic framework. Okay. So, but anyway, but the point I wanted to get you with it is just sort of the interesting bit about value, and there's a whole complicated thing going on in how we think about value and where it comes from and what it is, and but that's a part of the story, and for complicated reasons matters when you talk about free time and valuing your free time. And then, oh geez, I think I totally lost track of the other thing I wanted to from.
Are you talking about faith? Because he talks a lot about faith.
No, this is not.
So you have faith in the other, rather than in something that's not there. Would we like to do away with that is not there, but have the faith in one another to do the good?
Yes. Yeah. He's. Yeah, and this is, I mean, yes, this is definitely an example of that. It's broadly socially applied in that the ideal would be everyone has faith in the project that they're all part of. You think about a big worker cooperative, everyone has faith in the project that the worker cooperative is involved in, and in each other to responsibly contribute, and keep the thing going. So you have that faith project built into that. Which you would, I mean, and I guess the important point there would be you'd rely on that centrally, where capitalist labor relies on more on threats, right? You do it or you don't get paid, that kind of thing. Where the worker cooperative intrinsically is going to want to take care of everyone and want to encourage them to be their best, and not just one mistake and you're gone kind of attitude. But so you have to have more faith built in, as opposed to just a threat built in.
I don't know if people ever be ready for that.
Well, not yet. That's the point. Not yet. Not yet. But I mean,
then I think, okay, I'm not a religious person. Well, I may be religious, but without a God. But I wouldn't really want to take away what people choose to be or to believe in. I think that would, if we all not believe in that, then say we all do not believe in a God, and I just don't think that there is still going to be a lot of suffering, and we made that sharing with one another, and we'll have faith that the other one will help us through it.
Yeah.
But I don't think that that's possible. I think people like their spirit. He talks about spirit, right? And the spirit of a person has to be free. You can't bind it into something.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think that's a good reason why he doesn't spend time attacking theism rather than just saying, I don't think you need it. Look over here instead to something more important. So he's not worried about attacking it. And I think that's part of it.
Did Marx mention that?
Well, this is what in the famous line about the opiate of the masses.
Yes.
This is what Marx is getting at. But what people forget is the second part of the quote, which is the point is to get rid of conditions in which people feel like they need soothing.
Yes. Okay.
They need opium to comfort themselves. So if you do away with the conditions that cause people to need that soothing, they will just give it up. Which, so interesting. Marx himself seems to actually have the same kind of approach that Hagglund's giving us, that Marx is not really interested in attacking theism. He's just pointing out it's serving a purpose, a social purpose, and if you change the context, that purpose might go away, and then you wouldn't need it anymore.
Richard, how does one become a part of a worker co-op? Are you hired into it? Do you pay an entry fee? Are you born into it?
The big ones, and there are more of them around than we often realize. They fly under the radar, but there are lots of worker cooperatives around us. The people who put up my solar panels a few years ago was a worker cooperative, and they hire people, and what's common is to have I'm forgetting the word, but a kind of trial period. What is that called?
Probation.
Probationary period, so there'd be a probationary period where you are an employee of the cooperative. And then after that probationary period, then you would become a member of the cooperative. And how your stake in that, because that's going to involve an ownership stake, how that comes to be. I think there are lots of different models for how they do it. Would they take it out of your wages? Would they ask you to contribute it up front? Would it just be built into as an assumption it's an addition to your wages that your ownership stake is generated? So I think there are lots of ways you could do it, but it would start with they would just advertise, the ones around us now would just advertise the way any company advertises. They just have a different relationship to the employee.
My nephew is part of actually a financial institution in New York City that's a cooperative. And it's exactly what you said. He was hired under a probationary period, but I have to ask him more questions now. And then once I guess he's okay, or whatever the criteria is, then he becomes a full member of the cooperative. But it is a financial planning company.
Yeah, and you could, any group of people doing work could be a cooperative. It doesn't matter what the nature of the work is. So yeah, that's kind of interesting.
There have been examples all over the place of agricultural cooperatives.
Yeah.
Where they bring everybody is producing something and then they bring it to a central place, but it's a marketing technique, actually, at least. Well,
they can also share risk and help each other that way too.
Right. That's true.
And just general resources. Yeah, farmers cooperatives, that kind of thing. We're much bigger at one time in our history.
But we also have to recognize that this writer lives in a socialist country.
Mm-hmm.
And he's benefiting from that. He can write these books, he can have a house, he can have children.
He actually lives in the U.S.
Yeah, raised in a socialist country, yeah. He teaches at Yale.
Oh, yeah. So he doesn't live there? He doesn't live in?
No, and he just vacations there now, but he lives, he teaches at Yale, so he lives wherever Yale is.
Yeah.
No, I don't remember.
New Haven, Connecticut.
That's it. And Hagglund has talked about, that's part of one of the things he writes about, is that he's very, very aware of the benefits that he had of being born when he was kind of the heyday of the Swedish socialist experiment. Yeah. So it's things have declined because the system isn't as funded as well as it was in the past. But so he knows that he was he benefited a lot from that. That's part of why he appreciates it so much.
Mm-hmm.
Good for him.
But why do you think then the people are so against it? What is it? Because we voted for Trump, and so we voted for. Well, you take care of yourself.
I guess one thing I have come to over my frustrating decades of life is that people are more reactive than I want to acknowledge, maybe. Mm. They're a little more, and there's a great line in the movie Men in Black, where the young guy who's being hired into the service is saying, well, why don't you just tell people the truth about what's going on? Why do you have to hide that? People are smart. And then the old guy says, no, they're not. People are dumb, panicky animals. And you know it. He's talking because the young guy's a cop in New York. And what his premise is that with the person is smart, people are a problem. So it's something, there's something to that we are much more panicky than it seems like we ought to be, I guess.
Or that we think we are.
Or that we can. I certainly don't think of it that we are, and there it is. People are panicky. They react and react out of fear much easier than you'd expect.
Yeah, I think he wants to abolish fear by the system that he says. We won't have the fear of one another, the fear of things.
Yeah. No, and
And
that's a long-standing socialist argument, is that that kind of thinking gets reinforced because capitalism keeps people precarious, and if you're precarious, it becomes rational to be more reactive.
Yeah.
So so if you can change the context in which people are feeling those threats, they're presumably not going to be more as reactive and might be open to being more thoughtful and more open and have more planning and debate and even disagreement, which makes sense. And it's also a big part of the analysis of fascism is that it's relying, as a political form, fascism is relying especially on precariousness, which is why when there's a depression, that's why you get more fascist forms of government.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if you can solve the precarious problem, you go a long way to solving all kinds of problems, in theory.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't feel the hope.
Well, it's not going to happen today.
No,
It
won't happen in the lifetime I have.
Well, hard to. I mean, that's the other thing about history is that Jack Reed, I think, said this when he was covering the Russian Revolution, that there are decades when 10 days of history happen, and then there are 10 days when decades of history happen.
Mm-hmm.
So things can change very quickly.
Yeah, but then they become fascist. Most of them become fascist when they have.
Well, they don't have to. You can have more positive change. No, I share your suspicions that this process is going to be frustratingly long, and maybe much longer than my lifetime too.
Well, there was a lot of positive change in the 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and see, once people get frustrated and want something different, if you get enough of them in the street, you can really get change to happen quickly. Okay, now there's one bit they. Okay, yeah, he has a little bit where he talks about why we need each other and touches on what Hegel calls the master-slave dialectic, which I think is going to be important. So let me get to that. So we'll share. And there we go.
Actually free and not alienated.
Yeah, great question. So it's very important that when I talk about what the proper measure of value is, I don't just say free time. I say what I call socially available free time, and that's supposed to indicate that, no one can be free on their own, and and all the things that whatever I want to do and affirm as meaningful in itself is something that is a social activity that depends on the recognition of others, and I can't simply decide on my own that this is a satisfying type of activity because it depends on how others in such a system. I mean, several reasons for the rich person here to not. If you, first of all, part of actually being able to take what you're doing as intrinsically meaningful is seeing that it's also socially meaningful, and it's a perennial problem of especially the idle rich, that their activities quickly come to be seen as futile even for themselves, and you have all sorts of mental disorders because of that.
So let's say hypothetically you create the Bloomberg terminal, you might think you need to run for mayor and then president.
Yeah, exactly. For example, but we could enumerate any number of specific examples of this. But the fundamental point is simply that I can make a claim that, hey, this is actually what I'm doing here is intrinsically meaningful, has purpose in itself. But that always is something that I have to justify and that I have to be able to see in the world is actually does justice to the structures on which I depend. And if you're in a situation where you systematically have to deny recognition to all of those who sustain you, both that curtails how much you can literally see yourself and affirm yourself in what you do, but it also generates this sense of perpetual insecurity precisely. This is the classical problem of the master who makes the slave work for him, and he more and more atrophies and he becomes more and more neurotic about the source of his power because he's not doing anything, So part of actually being able to fully actualize your freedom is actively participating one way or another on the sort of like work and labor that sustains the life you're a part of, and getting yourself out of that is not a road to freedom. It's a road to like sort of like pathological forms of unfreedom.
Okay, so that master slave thing, this comes up in another interview where he's going to talk about it. I want to see if I can play that one too. Oh, nuts! I thought I had it marked. Where did I put that? So we're just listening to. Sorry about this, folks. I should have had this a little more organized, shouldn't I? Oh no. Oh well. I think I lost it. So I'm gonna have to talk about it myself. Okay. Really interesting idea that comes up in Hegel's political thinking, and in Hegel's language, he's this passage where he talks about the lord and the bondsman, and updating that language, Marx referred to it as master and slave. And Hegel's making the point this point about how dependent we are on each other, and that even the master ultimately is not free in that slave system. And what he's getting at is that the master, because the master has a slave or slaves, the slaves do everything. And over time, the slaves learn and become very good at doing everything. And the master doesn't know how to do anything over time because he's been so busy doing what are these other things. The actual work has been done by somebody else who gets good at it. And so the master-slave dialectic, which is how this is termed, is that the slave has a way of becoming the powerful one by virtue of knowing how to do everything, and the master becomes the weaker one because he doesn't know how to do anything anymore. And it's an idea that inspired a lot of radical politics in the decades, including Marx after Hegel died. But this idea that the powerless are the ones that have the power, and the powerful are actually powerless. And it's just, and that we don't see that because there's this sort of illusion that the society creates through this structure and this economic system of slavery, where it seems as though, and of course the master is going to always claim, it's all about me. I did this, I did that. It's my farm, my plantation. I did all of that. But no, that's not actually what happened. Someone did it.
Richard, at Honeywell, we pointed that out, or some people pointed that out when well, not everything, but many things were offloaded to China. And now Honeywell lost that technology really because nobody in the company could do now what China was doing. So it's a similar concept.
Oh, that's exactly, I think it's exactly the same concept. That's amazing. Wow. Real world example of wow, right there. Yeah. I actually have a new one, but I was not aware of that older one.
Well, yeah, I was working there. It's been 10 years, but the offloading started about 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And so Honeywell lost that technology, really.
Yeah. And And of course the Chinese knew this.
Exactly.
They knew what they were doing when they made these deals. That's why they demanded that the half ownership often, and certainly half ownership of all the intellectual property. That's why that was part of all those contracts. Was the Chinese knew if we get a hold of the information, we will know how to do it.
Yeah. And we give that to a communist country.
And it was a deal. You just signed a contract. No,
All they cared about was saving money. That's
right.
all. That was the only focus, was we're going to save money on labor.
And so that blind focus on one goal, it leads them to lose track of the other goals. Yeah, the modern, I just heard about this modern version of it yesterday, actually. The European Union is floating this plan that they want to try to force the Chinese to build factories in Europe to make solar panels. And they're demanding that the Chinese companies share the technology with them. They're like, what? So these European, all of these European companies that make solar panels have become so atrophied through all of these practices, like you're talking about, that they don't know how to build solar panels anymore as well as the Chinese do. And so in order to compete with Chinese production of solar panels, they actually have to now get the technology from the Chinese. So it's a strange thing, this master-slave dialectic, because you don't see it happening, but there's sort of there can be this moment at which all of a sudden, like John is saying, all of a sudden you just notice, like, wait a second, we don't know how to do this anymore.
So the CEO should have been reading Hegel.
Definitely.
Hegel knew this a long time ago.
Exactly. He was, master-slave dialectic. Yeah, it's a very, very, very powerful idea. Okay, let's see. What else do we want to do here with our last few minutes? Where am I? Oh, he's a little bit more on the relationship between socially available free time and profit. Let's do that. On the dig. Okay, hold on here. So we'll just start that.
Question of what we value. Why is that the fundamental question for you?
The first thing to say, and I push a lot of emphasis on this in the book, that it's very important to understand that Marx, unlike what he's been read often by both people who are pro and against Marx, he's not saying that labor is the general and only source of value transhistorically. He's saying that labor time comes to play a very specific time is a role in the production of wealth under capitalism. That has to do with several things. I mean, first it has to do with that the reason, if I'm a capitalist, why am I even employing someone? How is it possible that in principle can profit from employing another human being? Why does that even occur to anyone? Well, because human beings, like all other living beings, we just through our activity of maintaining ourselves, we in principle, we create a surplus of time. That is to say, we don't have to spend all our time on just securing our own survival. Imagine if that were the case, that if you didn't constantly, Dan, if everything you did was just devoted to making sure that Dan doesn't die, I could never exploit you, because literally as soon as I tried to get you to do something that wasn't about your own survival, you'd die. You wouldn't be there. So you have to create a surplus of time to even be exploitable. So I take this, there's so much talk in Marxism. Everyone knows about surplus value and all these things. But one thing I do in the book is well, what's amazing, you have to trace this back to the question of surplus time that belongs to all living beings. And that have special status for us as human beings, because as I said before, unlike other living beings, we have that surplus of time, but unlike them, we can ask ourselves, what should we do with that surplus of time? What should Dan do with all that time he has that is not required just to make sure that Dan doesn't die? And that...
Now, before he goes on, the one that I want to catch up a little bit with that. So think about feudal society. There is exploitation involved. That's the whole point, right? The master is exploiting the surplus. The lord is exploiting the surplus from the serfs. But the way the serfs' life is organized is around production, not time. Capitalism organizes labor around time because you're paying for the labor. So the lord in feudalism doesn't really care how long it takes the serf to produce what the serf's producing. It's totally irrelevant. The lord's just going to take the percentage that is defined in their relationship. But the capitalist is exploiting time directly. And so all of a sudden in a capitalist system, time matters much more than other kind of factors that went into the economy. And it's so Hagglund wants us to notice, oh, that's important, that's a change, but it also is partly he's wanting us to track that's something that Marx noticed way back then too, was this phenomenon that capitalism is centrally focused, kind of circling around questions of time. How much time do you have? How much time do you have to work? How much time is leisure time? Time is now this amazingly important category in a way that it wasn't before. Anyway, so I just wanted to emphasize that.
That's why we can ask these questions of value and so on, and that's why we can have free time to devote ourselves to things that we take to be intrinsically meaningful. But it's also why we can be exploited, because like however much it costs to make sure that workers reproduce themselves and don't die, that's less in principle than the value that they can produce for their labor. That's why in general terms, there can be any exploitation and any sort of surplus in the economy in the first place.
Limited only by the amount of time that that workers require to reproduce themselves, which is a time limit. Ultimately.
Absolutely. And let's try to walk through this slowly, because like I think it's very important. So like, and this is actually when you read Capital with this lens and you see like, this is what the chapter on the working day is so important. But like what happens, a very important shift that happens is that like, yeah, so that puts a limit to how much you can exploit workers. But then also like, in an initial phase, you then try anyways to get them to work as much as possible, push your workers to the maximum. But that will generate resistance and workers organizing, and as happened, and demanding limits to the workday. And once those limits are set, now to increase how much value I get out of my workers, I instead turn to like improving technology. So instead of just having absolute surplus value, I now try to get relative surplus value through like, okay, I can't get you to work now down 15 hours a day. You only work 8 hours. But because I supply you with this technology, you can actually produce as much goods as you used to in those 15 hours. And I increase the possibility of making a profit that way. Now, the essential point here is just that like, from the standpoint of me as a capitalist producer, I'm always trying to reduce the amount of labor time that goes into producing any given commodity, because the less time it takes, the less I have to pay you for producing that one commodity. So this is like what I'm, from the standpoint of producing, I'm trying to reduce it, and that's why I'm developing technologies. But the contradiction is that the more I do that, the more I like reduce how much time it takes to produce, the more we, as a whole, the fewer people are required for labor. So hence there are fewer people getting paid, and there are fewer consumers. And if people don't buy my commodity, it doesn't matter if I cut down the labor time it took to produce it, because if no one can buy it, I can't turn a profit on it anyways. So you get all of these contradictions and crises of this. I trace all of this, but the essential point is simply that like these things that like could be liberating, that is to say, like developing technologies that makes just necessary but not intrinsically meaningful work more efficient and faster, that frees up more time in principle, actually doesn't have that effect under capitalism, because the only thing that generates value is time spent on producing and buying commodities. So
unemployment becomes a problem rather than really good news.
Absolutely, but it's also important to see that it's not like, oh, we can just then take these technologies developed under capitalism and use them for emancipatory ends, because even how we design and conceive of technology is already shaped by the profit motive. So like one of the things that capitalism has taught us about ourselves historically is like not only that we can value our time, but that we can free up more time through technological development. But if the purpose of that is to make a profit, then even the types of technologies we develop are going to be distorted by that motive. Whereas like we don't even.
And here I think it's good to maybe point out when the talk about value it uses the vocabulary of economics, because that's sort of where the conversation was started and might matter most. But when you start to talk about, well, how does this relate to human beings and how we live our lives, what he says about purpose, it suddenly becomes the thing that really matters. So I think that's a good way to think about it, that you can talk about value and if you want to talk about money, but if you want to talk about humans and what matters, purpose all of a sudden becomes the relevant concept. But they're actually tracking the same thing. It's just and they're both subject to this social definition. What is it we value? What purposes are we putting ourselves towards? It's in the end the same question. The thing you put your purpose towards is the thing you value. And a socialist society would value time in a very different way than a capitalist society. Because capitalist society, the purpose is to exploit the time. For socialism, the purpose would be to maximize the socially available free time. So anyway, I think that's a good way to, in terms of just how to understand what he's really talking about. Purpose is really that word really matters to explain what he's getting at. And we're about out of time, so I should probably stop and see if you all have any last questions.
Not so much a question, but I do think that it has to do with education.
Mm-hmm.
If children are not educated this way, or, although in this, of course, my children were brought up like that because I talked about it. But they're capitalists. I mean, they have to be. They're good people, that doesn't, but they are definitely capitalists. They also want to have their big boat and the big car and, the other one doesn't, but one does. And I think, and the kids have to get a job before school. Yeah, no, it has to be an education, but I don't know how you can get that. Like in China, they had to do, it was regimented. They couldn't think anything else, right? Communism was their purpose, although it's not communism what they have. It's a dictatorship, isn't it? That's not communism.
I think it seems to me what the culture is teaching is really Confucianism, right? That there's a way of organizing society and people fit in different places in society. And the Confucianism really, I think, matters in the Chinese context.
Oh.
Which is actually one tension in all of this, right? Is that if the model that of like a worker cooperative is the model going forward where people are going to experience the most freedom, it's also demanding in different ways too, because all of a sudden, when you're in a worker cooperative, you're one of the owners, and now so the problems that owners have are now one of your problems. Where if you're just working for the company and you don't have that interest in it, when you go home and it's somebody else's problem. Now it may affect you, but they don't even talk to you about it, so you can't worry about it because no one's going to let you know what the owners of the company are really worried about. But they have to figure, there are problems they have about how much are we selling, how much are inputs costing, can we actually keep the business going, all of that those things that owners think about. When you're a worker, you're in a sense free from that. But now if it's a worker cooperative, you're thrust back into it, which is ultimately a problem people talk about with communitarian lifestyle, that if it's in the nature of the society to focus people socially or keep them organized socially, especially the way Confucianism does, you are at the same time putting demands on them, which, especially from the point of view of English philosophy, which for centuries has been very individualistic and individual oriented, there can be a little conflict there. But I'm more free in some ways, but now I have more responsibilities too.
Mhm.
And including responsibilities to a social unit that I need now to pay attention to and keep going. So I have to do some emotional work too that's now demanded of me to keep that social unit productive, where before I could just ignore it and go home when I'm done. So that's dialectics, right? Things are connected and often occupy their opposites. And then, when you get one thing, you're going to get a reaction. And that's an important part of dialectical thinking, to appreciate all of that. So there are tensions in all of this too, right? The way he's putting it sounds really good, but you can step back and also, from a different perspective, a more individual freedom perspective, go, well, wait a second. In the end here, you're going to demand a lot more of me than I was expecting. And yeah, maybe we are. But that also then will become part of the education. It's part of what you're teaching
Yes.
children to do.
And
Yeah.
while some people are very good at it, I think socially interacting with people and cooperation and community are much harder than putting a widget together.
Yeah, this is Sartre's No Exit, right? The last line. All those other people.
Yeah.
Sartre was a big fan of these kinds of communitarian arrangements. But
I
he's still
know.
acknowledging there's a problem there too.
I think that's why they say as we get older, if we have social connections, it keeps our brain more active, because we have to think harder when we're dealing with a lot of people.
I hadn't thought about that level of it, but that makes a lot of sense. That's an additional benefit. Being social, it's forcing you to think more.
Well, and we lose that
Subtly.
terrible fear, don't we? We lose the fear. We can live without fear if we have socialism like that. If we think like that, we can do it. There is an end to our life, and that's it. But we don't have to have the fear of where we're going, hell or whatever they come up with.
Right.
But that's important, I think, because right now we don't know whether we are going to get Social Security. And if that happens, if it did take that away, we'll have terrible poverty of the old in this world. So I do live with fear. Not necessarily for me. I think I can make it.
Yeah.
But I am fearful that this is happening.
Yeah. And that's another, but again, the dialectical point, they could try, but there will be a reaction and it will be strong. Because Social Security is the most popular thing the government does.
Yeah.
So,
this is a sort of a dialectic about teaching, like Elena was talking about, that my experience was that it was easier to just be the one in charge, whereas you got a much better result if you had a group of teachers who were planning together and sharing ideas and doing things kind of the same way. It was way harder, but the product was way better.
Way better, yeah.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
Well, folks, we've gone past our time here.
We'll see you sometime.
Yeah, couple months. I've sure had a good time going through Hagglund's book with you all.
Next year, we'll see you next year.
We'll see about Spinoza next. All right.
All right.
Bye. Bye, all of you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.